Picture this. You're standing on the walls of Japan's most impregnable fortress, watching 30,000 armed men surround you. They're not an invading foreign army. They're your countrymen, former samurai, warriors who helped create modern Japan just 9 years ago. And now, they want to burn it all down. You look around. Your garrison has 3,400 people inside these walls. Sounds decent until you do the math. Only 600 are actual soldiers. The rest? Government officials, their families, civilians who fled here, people who've never held a sword in combat. The ammunition depot? Empty. Your commander ordered it evacuated days ago. Didn't want the rebels capturing 60 tons of gunpowder and bullets. Smart tactically, suicidal practically. Food supplies? Maybe 2 weeks if you ration carefully. The castle's main tower, the architectural masterpiece that took decades to build, the symbol of this fortress's power, it caught fire 3 days ago. Still burning. The smoke column is visible for miles, a beacon telling every rebel in Kyushu exactly where you are. Oh, and your actual commander, the guy who's supposed to be leading this defense, he evacuated, took most of the professional troops with him, left a 34-year-old officer named Tani Tateki in charge. Tani has never commanded a siege defense before, never even commanded this many men before. The math is simple. 600 soldiers against 30,000 rebels, no ammunition, dwindling food. Your fortress is literally on fire. And leading the army outside is Saigo Takamori, Japan's most celebrated general, the man who overthrew the shogunate, a living legend who's never lost a battle. You should surrender. Any rational person would surrender. Instead, you're going to hold this castle for 11 days. You're going to turn basic siege defense into an art form. You're going to prove that sometimes the best weapon isn't a gun or a sword. It's a building designed by a genius 250 years ago who understood exactly how to make an enemy bleed. If you want to see how 600 men defeated 30,000 through pure architectural brilliance and desperate courage, hit that subscribe button, because this siege is unlike anything you've ever heard. This is the story of Kumamoto Castle, Japan's last samurai rebellion, and 11 days that rewrote the rules of siege warfare. February 22nd, 1877. The rebellion has just started, and already it's spiraling out of control. To understand why samurai are attacking a Japanese government fortress, you need to understand that Japan has been going through the most dramatic transformation in its history. 9 years ago, 1868, the Meiji Restoration overthrew 700 years of military dictatorship and returned power to the emperor. It was supposed to modernize Japan, drag it into the industrial age, make it competitive with Western powers. It worked, kind of. Japan modernized faster than any nation in history. Railroads, telegraph lines, Western-style government, a conscript army instead of samurai warriors. That last part is the problem. For centuries, samurai were Japan's warrior elite. If you were samurai, you had status, income, purpose. You carried swords. You mattered. The Meiji government abolished the samurai class, banned swords in public, replaced the warrior tradition with peasant conscripts carrying rifles, told men who'd spent their entire lives training for war that they were obsolete. Most samurai accepted this, grudgingly. They got government pensions, found new jobs, adapted. But in Satsuma province, the southern tip of Kyushu Island, acceptance wasn't an option. Satsuma samurai were different, harder, more traditional. They'd led the Meiji Restoration. They'd overthrown the shogunate. They expected to be honored, not discarded. Their leader was Saigo Takamori. If you've seen The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, he's the inspiration for Katsumoto's character. Except the real Saigo was more complex, more tragic, and way more dangerous. Saigo was a hero, genuinely. He'd led Satsuma forces during the Boshin War that overthrew the shogunate. He'd served in the new Meiji government. He was popular, charismatic, and deeply committed to samurai values, honor, loyalty, martial excellence. He was also completely opposed to modernization, not because he was stupid. Saigo understood perfectly well what modern armies could do. He just believed Japan was losing its soul, becoming a cheap imitation of the West, abandoning the warrior code that had defined Japanese culture for centuries. In 1873, Saigo resigned from the government and returned to Satsuma. He established private military academies, basically training camps for disaffected samurai who wanted to preserve traditional warrior culture. The government watched nervously, but didn't intervene. Saigo was too popular, too respected. By 1877, Satsuma had become a powder keg. Thousands of unemployed samurai, military training academies operating openly, growing resentment toward the central government. Everyone knew something was coming. They just didn't know when. The spark came in January 1877. The government, increasingly paranoid about Saigo's influence, tried to quietly remove weapons from the Kagoshima arsenal. Saigo's students discovered the operation. Riots broke out. Government officials fled. Saigo tried to calm things down. He didn't want rebellion, but his students were beyond control. They demanded he lead them. Thousands of samurai showed up at his home, begging him to restore the old ways, to show the government that samurai still mattered. Saigo gave in, not because he thought he could win, because abandoning his followers would violate everything he believed about loyalty and duty. On February 15, 1877, Saigo Takamori marched out of Kagoshima with 30,000 men. Most were samurai. Some had rifles, modern weapons captured from government arsenals. Most carried swords and spears. They were marching north to confront the government. First obstacle? Kumamoto Castle. Kumamoto wasn't just a fortress, it was a statement. A medieval military complex built in the early 1600s by Kato Kiyomasa, one of Japan's greatest castle architects, and a tactical genius who understood siege warfare better than anyone in Japanese history. Kato had built Kumamoto to be unconquerable, not just difficult to attack, actually unconquerable. The walls were curved, not straight, sloped at the bottom, vertical at the top, with an overhang that made climbing impossible. You couldn't use grappling hooks, couldn't scale with ladders. The curve meant siege towers couldn't get close enough. It was geometry as a weapon. The moats weren't just water-filled ditches, they were engineering marvels, deep, wide, with bottom surfaces designed to trap and drown anyone who tried crossing. The inner moat alone was 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep. The castle had 49 turrets, not decorative, functional, each positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. If you attacked one section of wall, you'd be shot at from 3 different angles. The turrets were designed so defenders could fire down at almost vertical angles, meaning even if you reached the base of the wall, you were still a target. Inside, the castle had intricate corridors, false paths, hidden passages. If attackers somehow breached the outer walls, they'd get lost in a maze designed to channel them into kill zones. The main tower, the Tenshukaku, was 7 stories tall, visible for miles. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a command center, observation post, and final redoubt, made entirely of wood, but reinforced with stone and iron, designed to withstand fire and cannon bombardment. And here's Kato's genius move. He planted ginkgo trees throughout the castle grounds, thousands of them. Ginkgo bark is edible in emergencies, not tasty, but survivable. Kato wanted his garrison to hold out even if supply lines were cut for months. The castle also had a secret. The floor joists in certain buildings were made from taro root stems. Dried, they looked like regular wood. In a siege, you could dig them up and eat them. Kato Kiyomasa died in 1611, but his castle lived on. It had never fallen, ever. For 250 years, Kumamoto Castle stood as the ultimate defensive position in southern Japan. Now Saigo Takamori was about to test whether medieval military architecture could stand up to modern warfare. Tani Tateki, the 34-year-old officer suddenly in charge of defending Kumamoto, was not having a great month. His superior, garrison commander Taneda Masaki, had evacuated the castle on February 19th, just 3 days before Saigo's army arrived. Taneda took 1,500 professional soldiers with him. His reasoning? Better to preserve a mobile fighting force than get trapped in a siege. That left Tani with the dregs, 600 actual soldiers, mostly inexperienced conscripts from the new Imperial army, plus about 2,800 civilians, government officials, police officers, their families, refugees who'd fled Saigo's advancing army. Tani's first move was brutal but necessary. Kick out anyone who couldn't fight. Women, children, elderly, evacuate them immediately. It sounds cruel, but every mouth that stays needs food. The castle's food supplies were already inadequate. He couldn't feed 3,400 people for more than a few days. The evacuation was chaotic. Families separated. People fled into the countryside with whatever they could carry. Some made it to government-controlled territory. Others were caught by rebel patrols. But Tani got the population inside the castle down to about 800, mostly fighting-age men who could at least hold a rifle. Then came the ammunition problem. The castle's main ammunition depot had stored enough bullets and gunpowder to defend against a small army. Taneda had ordered it evacuated before leaving, didn't want rebels capturing it. Smart strategically, disaster tactically. Tani's troops had maybe 50 rounds per rifle. Once those were gone, they'd be fighting samurai with swords using, what, harsh language? Food was equally dire. The castle granaries had rice, dried fish, some vegetables, maybe 2 weeks at full rations, less if he needed to ration carefully. The famous ginkgo trees were there, and Tani ordered his men to identify every edible surface in the castle: bark, floor joists, leather, anything that could be consumed in an emergency. And then there was the fire. On February 19th, 3 days before Saigo's army arrived, a fire broke out in the castle's main tower. Nobody knows exactly how it started. Some accounts blame careless soldiers. Others suggest sabotage by rebel sympathizers inside the garrison. Doesn't matter. The result was catastrophic. The Tenshukaku, Kumamoto's 7-story architectural masterpiece, went up like a torch. Wooden structures built 250 years ago don't burn slowly. They explode. Tani's men tried to fight the fire. Useless. The flames spread too fast. Within hours, the main tower was gone. Other buildings caught fire. By the time the blaze was under control, a quarter of the castle's interior structures had burned. The smoke was visible for 50 miles. Rebels marching toward Kumamoto saw it and cheered. The castle was destroying itself. Saigo Takamori arrived on February 22nd with 30,000 men and saw the smoke still rising from Kumamoto's ruins. His officers expected a quick victory. The castle was literally on fire. The garrison was undermanned. They had no heavy weapons, no ammunition reserves. Saigo could just wait them out, starve them into surrender within a week. But Saigo knew Kumamoto's reputation. He'd studied military history. He knew what Kato Kiyomasa had built, and he knew that even a damaged fortress, if properly defended, could bleed an attacking army dry. He offered Tani a choice: surrender honorably, and the garrison would be allowed to leave unharmed. Refuse, and the castle would be taken by force. Tani's response was silence. No reply, no negotiation, just soldiers manning the walls and preparing for battle. Saigo sighed. He'd expected this. He ordered his army to surround the castle completely, cut off all supply lines, prevent any relief forces from reaching Tani. Then he'd wait. February 23rd, the siege begins. Saigo's forces encircle Kumamoto, 30,000 men forming a ring around the castle. They dig trenches, build fieldworks, set up artillery positions. Not to bombard the castle, they don't have heavy siege guns, but to defend their positions in case government reinforcements arrive. Inside the castle, Tani assembles his 600 soldiers and lays out the situation. It's not encouraging. We're outnumbered 50-1. We have minimal ammunition, limited food, no hope of immediate relief. The castle is partly burned. If we fight, most of us will die. Then he gives them the option. Anyone who wants to leave can try to slip through rebel lines tonight. No shame, no dishonor, just survival. Not a single soldier leaves. Maybe it's loyalty. Maybe it's the fact that rebels would execute deserters anyway. Maybe it's pride. They're Imperial army soldiers, and surrendering to samurai rebels would be admitting the old warrior class is still superior. Whatever the reason, all 600 stay. Tani organizes his defense. He divides his force into rotating shifts, some men on the walls, some resting, some preparing defenses. He rations ammunition strictly. No wasting bullets on long-range shots. Only fire when targets are close enough to guarantee hits. Food gets rationed immediately. 1 bowl of rice per day, supplemented with whatever they can scrounge. The ginkgo bark, dried seaweed, leather belts boiled into gelatin. Then Saigo's forces attack. Not a direct assault. Saigo's too smart for that. Instead, he sends small raiding parties to probe the castle's defenses, test the walls, find weak points, draw fire, and see how much ammunition the defenders have. Tani's men hold discipline. They don't take the bait. Rebels approach the outer walls, shout insults, wave swords. The defenders stay silent. Wait. When rebel raiding parties get within 50 yards, the defenders open fire. Controlled bursts, aimed shots. Half a dozen rebels drop. The rest retreat. Saigo watches and learns. The garrison still has ammunition, still has discipline. This won't be quick. Day 2. February 24th. Rebels try a different approach. They set fire to buildings outside the castle walls. The smoke is supposed to obscure their movements, let them get closer to the moats. Doesn't work. Kumamoto's walls are too high, the moats too wide. Smoke just makes it harder for the rebels to see the defenders, who are shooting blind into the haze and still hitting targets because they know exactly where the approaches are. More rebels die. Saigo pulls back and regroups. Day 3. February 25th. Saigo decides to try psychological warfare. He orders his troops to display captured government banners, parade captured weapons, shout that the emperor has abandoned Kumamoto's defenders, that the government is negotiating a peace deal with the rebels, that reinforcements aren't coming. Some of it might even be true. The government is scrambling. They weren't prepared for a rebellion this large. They're mobilizing troops, but it takes time to move armies across Japan's primitive railroad network. Tani's garrison ignores the taunts. They've committed. Surrender now would be pointless. Day 4. February 26th, the first major assault. Saigo sends 2,000 men against the castle's northern wall. It's a genuine attempt to breach the defenses, Not a probe, but a full attack. The rebels come in waves, samurai with swords in front, riflemen behind them providing covering fire. They carry ladders, grappling hooks, ropes. They reach the moat and discover why Kato Kiyomasa was a genius. The moat isn't just water. The bottom is mud, deep, sticky mud, designed to trap anyone who tries wading across. Rebels sink to their waists. Some go under completely, weighed down by armor and weapons. They're drowning in sight of the castle walls. Those who make it across the moat reach the walls and discover the curve. You can't climb a curved wall. The slope at the bottom is gradual enough to approach, but as you climb, the angle gets steeper until you're trying to scale a vertical surface with an overhang at the top. Ladders don't work. They can't get the right angle. Grappling hooks slide off the overhang. Men cling to the stone, trying to find handholds, and get shot by defenders firing straight down at them. The attack lasts 4 hours. Rebels keep coming, keep dying. Finally, Saigo calls it off. Casualty count, roughly 400 rebels dead or wounded. Kumamoto's defenders, 12 wounded, 3 dead from return fire. Tani's men cheer. They've held. They've proven the castle's defences work even against overwhelming numbers. But Tani knows the truth. They used a quarter of their remaining ammunition in that one battle. 3 more fights like this, and they'll be out of bullets entirely. Day 5. February 27th. Saigo changes tactics again. No more frontal assaults. Instead, he settles into a proper siege. Surround the castle, cut off supplies, wait for starvation to do the work. It's the smart move. Tani's garrison is already on reduced rations. They can't hold out indefinitely. But Kumamoto Castle has one more trick. Inside the fortress, beneath the burned ruins, are storage rooms that survived the fire. Tani's men dig through the wreckage and find caches of rice, dried fish and sake that nobody had catalogued. It's not much, maybe 3 or 4 days of additional food, but it's hope. They also find something unexpected, a small stock of ammunition that Taneda missed during the evacuation. Only a few thousand rounds, but at this point, a few thousand rounds might as well be a treasure chest. Tani quietly redistributes the ammunition, doesn't announce it, doesn't want the men getting overconfident, but now they have a bit more breathing room. Day 6 to 7, February 28th to March 1st. Stalemate. Saigo's forces maintain the siege. Tani's garrison continues holding the walls. Occasional sniper fire, occasional probing attacks. Nothing decisive. Inside the castle, men are starting to feel the hunger. 1 bowl of rice per day isn't enough for soldiers standing watch in winter cold. They're eating bark, boiling leather. Some men collapse from exhaustion and malnutrition, but they don't break. Outside, Saigo is getting frustrated. His army is also running low on food. 30,000 men need a lot of supplies, and the local countryside has been picked clean. His supply lines stretch back to Kagoshima, and the government is starting to mobilize. Saigo knows he's on a clock. Every day he wastes at Kumamoto is a day the government has to assemble a proper army. He needs to take this castle and move north before Imperial reinforcements arrive. Day 8, March 2nd. Saigo orders another assault. This time he's throwing everything at the castle's eastern wall, the section most damaged by the fire. If there's a weak point, it's there. 5,000 rebels attack at dawn. They've learned from the previous assault. This time, they bring wooden planks to lay across the moat, makeshift bridges that won't sink into the mud. They bring better ladders, designed for curved walls. They concentrate their riflemen to provide suppressing fire. It almost works. Rebels get across the moat, get ladders against the walls, start climbing. Some make it halfway up before defenders can react. Tani's men fight desperately. They're out of ammunition now, completely out. They're throwing stones, pouring boiling water, using anything they can find as a weapon, and they're losing. Rebels reach the top of the wall in 3 places. For a few terrifying minutes, it looks like the defences will collapse. Samurai with swords are fighting hand-to-hand with conscript soldiers armed with bayonets and desperation. Then Tani does something insane. He orders the men to fall back from the breached sections, but not retreat. Instead, they pull back to secondary defensive positions inside the castle. Narrower corridors, tighter spaces where numbers don't matter as much. Remember the maze Kato Kiyomasa built? The false corridors, the kill zones, the architecture designed to trap invaders? Now it activates. Rebels who breach the walls find themselves in a labyrinth, corridors that dead end, rooms with no exits, and everywhere, defenders who know the layout perfectly, firing from hidden positions, disappearing before the rebels can respond. It's guerrilla warfare inside a building. The rebels' numbers become a liability. They crowd into corridors, getting in each other's way, can't bring their full force to bear. After 6 hours of brutal close-quarters fighting, Saigo recalls his troops. They've lost another 600 men. They've gained nothing. Tani's garrison has lost 50 men. They're exhausted, bleeding, starving, but they still hold the castle. Day 9, March 3rd. News reaches both sides simultaneously. A government relief army is approaching. Major General Nozu Michitsura is marching from the north with 4,000 fresh troops. They'll reach Kumamoto within 2 days. Saigo faces a decision. He can continue the siege and fight a two-front war, defending against Nozu's relief force while maintaining pressure on the castle. Or he can abandon Kumamoto and reposition his army to fight Nozu on more favourable ground. He chooses to stay. He's come too far, invested too much. If he abandons Kumamoto now, his entire rebellion looks like a failure. He splits his forces, 20,000 to maintain the siege, 10,000 to intercept Nozu's relief column. Inside the castle, Tani hears about the relief force and makes a calculation. They just need to hold 2 more days, 48 hours. They can do this. Day 10, March 4th. Saigo's forces attack again. This time, it's not about breaching the walls, it's about keeping Tani's garrison pinned down, preventing them from sallying out to link up with Nozu's approaching army. The fighting is constant. Rebels assault the walls in rotating waves, fresh troops every few hours, never giving the defenders a chance to rest. Tani's men are beyond exhaustion. Some are literally sleeping standing up during brief lulls. They've been on 1 bowl of rice per day for over a week. Many have dysentery from eating bark and contaminated water. They're out of ammunition, completely. They're fighting with whatever they can grab, broken furniture as clubs, shards of pottery as cutting weapons, stones, fists, and they hold. Day 11, March 5th. The relief force arrives. Nozu's 4,000 troops clash with Saigo's 10,000-man blocking force just north of Kumamoto. It's a brutal battle, modern rifles and artillery against samurai swords and outdated tactics. The government troops have better weapons and discipline, the rebels have numbers and desperation. The battle lasts all day. By evening, Nozu's forces have punched through. They're battered, but they've broken the rebel cordon. Inside Kumamoto Castle, Tani sees smoke from the battle, hears the distant artillery, knows relief is close. That night, a small government detachment, maybe 200 men, fights its way through rebel lines and reaches the castle. They bring ammunition, food, medical supplies. It's not much, but it's enough. The siege isn't over, but the equation has changed. Kumamoto's garrison is no longer isolated. Saigo can't surround them completely anymore. Government reinforcements are arriving. Saigo Takamori looks at Kumamoto Castle, still standing, still defiant, still unconquered, and makes the hardest decision of his military career. He abandons the siege. March 6th, his army withdraws. They're not retreating. Saigo's too proud for that. They're repositioning to fight the government army on better terms, but everyone knows what it means. Kumamoto Castle held. 600 soldiers, starving and exhausted, defended a partly burned fortress against 30,000 rebels for 11 days and never surrendered. The Satsuma Rebellion continued for another 6 months. Saigo Takamori fought brilliantly, won several battles, but couldn't overcome the government's superior resources and modern military organization. On September 24, 1877, Saigo made his last stand at Shiroyama Hill. Surrounded, wounded, out of ammunition, he committed seppuku, ritual suicide, rather than surrender. He was 49 years old. Japan mourned. Even his enemies respected him. The emperor eventually pardoned Saigo posthumously, recognizing that he'd been motivated by honor, not treason. The rebellion he led was Japan's last. The samurai class disappeared into history. The modern Japanese military, built on conscription and industrial warfare, became the model. Within a generation, Japan would defeat China and Russia in wars that established it as a major world power. And Kumamoto Castle? It survived the siege, but not entirely intact. The fire had destroyed many buildings. The fighting had damaged walls and structures. Repairs took years. In World War II, American bombing raids damaged the castle further. Post-war reconstruction restored some sections, but much of the original architecture was lost. Then, in 2016, a massive earthquake hit Kumamoto. The castle's walls, some of the same walls that had held against Saigo's army, collapsed. The reconstructed towers sustained heavy damage. Japan is rebuilding again. The restoration is expected to take decades, but the commitment is absolute. Kumamoto Castle will stand, because it's more than a building, it's a symbol, proof that sometimes brilliant architecture and human courage can defeat overwhelming odds. Tani Tateki, the 34-year-old officer who commanded the defense, became a national hero. He continued serving in the Imperial army, eventually rising to the rank of general. He never spoke much about the siege, didn't like the attention, just did his duty. The 600 soldiers who held the walls? Most survived the siege. Some died in subsequent battles of the rebellion. A few lived long enough to see Japan become a modern industrial power, to see the samurai era fade completely into memory. They never got monuments, no grand memorials, just a footnote in history books. 600 soldiers held Kumamoto Castle for 11 days against 30,000 rebels. Doesn't sound like much when you write it that way. Sounds almost routine, until you understand what it actually meant, what they actually did. They were conscripts, peasant farmers who'd been drafted into the new Imperial army. Most had never fought before. They were everything the samurai class despised, commoners playing at being soldiers. And they defeated the most legendary samurai general in Japanese history, not through superior tactics, not through better weapons, not through luck, through endurance, through refusing to quit when every rational calculation said they should, through trusting that the walls around them, built by a genius 2.5 centuries earlier, would hold if they just had the courage to stand behind them. Kato Kiyomasa designed Kumamoto Castle in the early 1600s and died never knowing if his creation would actually work. He built it to be unconquerable and never saw it tested. In 1877, his castle proved him right. The curved walls that seemed decorative, they were mathematical precision turned into stone. The impossible-to-climb surfaces saved hundreds of lives. The moats that seemed excessive, they drowned rebel soldiers and prevented every assault from gaining momentum. The maze-like interior, it turned the castle into a death trap for invaders, letting 600 men fight like 6,000. Even the ginkgo trees worked. Tani's men ate the bark when rice ran out. It tasted like garbage. It kept them alive. Every detail Kato included, every architectural choice that seemed like overkill, proved essential when the siege came. That's the real miracle of Kumamoto Castle. Not that it held for 11 days, but that a man who died 266 years before the siege designed a fortress so perfectly that it worked exactly as intended when tested under the worst possible circumstances. Saigo Takamori's rebellion was doomed from the start. He knew it. His followers knew it. They fought anyway, because some things matter more than winning. Tani Tateki's defense was equally doomed. 600 men can't beat 30,000, can't hold out with no ammunition and no food, can't survive 11 days of constant attacks, except they did. Not because they were superhuman, because they had walls built by someone who understood that wars aren't won by the bravest soldiers or the largest armies. They're won by the side that refuses to break. Kumamoto Castle refused to break, and 600 men stood behind those walls and refused to break with it. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most incredible moments. Leave a comment. What siege defense do you want to hear about next? The math said Kumamoto should have fallen in 3 days. 11 days later, the rebels were the ones retreating. Sometimes the math is wrong.